Good afternoon, everybody. This is Scoggins from the Absolute Sound, and we have got a really spectacular, I hope anyway, that's my goal, review of the Alexia V loudspeaker from Wilson Audio. We have been wanting to do this video for a while. I think maybe it's a little bit too much of a perfectionist. Maybe it's my OCD and part of why I like detailing cars so much. I just wanted to get this review just perfect and really talk through what I'm hearing and how I think the design of the speaker and the build quality contributes to that. So with your forbearance, what we'll do is we will go through in a fairly detailed fashion a good portion of the 31, I'm not kidding, 31 different design and build changes on the Alexia V over the Alexia II loudspeaker, because I think that a good number of those do contribute to the sound, and we will show pictures of the cabinet and video of the different parts that were changed, and we'll talk through what I feel that's contributed to the speaker as best I can. So once we go through this design and build discussion on the video, what I'd then like to do is talk to you about the sound impressions I've heard. I've been able to get some really amazing files, both from David Solomon of Qobuz and Ken Forsyth from Tidal MQA, and listen to those files and really sort of pick out a few that I like musically. I love the performances of some of these tracks. And then there's some old standby favorites. My friends will tell you that there's always a yellow track or two involved with me to sort of test various elements of the speaker design. And I'll talk about what I heard. But what I want to do is give you a little bit of my own personal history in audio, because I think it's relevant for this review. One is, I've actually done some work as a recording engineer. I was, in a way, through apprenticeship, trained to be, if you will, an assistant recording engineer by my friends at Chesky Records. I lived in New York City in the early 90s and was able to sort of moonlight late at night working on some studio sessions and some live sessions that David Chesky and his team did. At the time, Bob Katz, the great mastering engineer who's fought so bravely in the loudness wars, was the engineer for Chesky. Later it was Nick Prout. And at times Barry Wolfson was involved in some of the mastering. But what I did was I learned how to place microphones in a way where you could use a simple set of fewer microphones to capture sound quality differences and capture that performance in a more natural, lifelike way. So what I then did was I eventually moved to Atlanta, where I'm broadcasting from now, and worked with my good friend Nick Arroyo to do some live to 2-track classical recordings of musicians moonlighting from the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and a couple other groups around town involved in opera and then the Atlanta Baroque Orchestra as well. And what I learned from that experience kind of informs this review quite a bit, because I know what the timbre of the instruments sound like, particularly guitar and any string instruments like violin or cello. So some of those recordings I actually will talk about in this review and sort of tie it into more relevant recordings that you might be curious as to what they sound. Now, I'm not a Robert Harley or Jonathan Valin or Tony Quartersman or any of these other great writers that we have at the Absolute Sound. I'm more on the business side, but I do have an opinion about sound, and I do think it's fairly informed. But do forgive me if my language doesn't communicate things perhaps as well as some of our illustrious senior writers do in the print magazine. In fact, as it turns out, Robert Harley has just taken receipt, you probably saw that video, of some Alexia Vs himself. So if you want the definitive, detailed review of the Alexia V, I can't talk highly enough about Robert Harley, our editor at TAS. I'm sure he will do a very thorough job. But in the short run, I think I do have some perspective here, and I'll tell you why. I'm a previous owner of the Wilson Audio Alexia II, which is the predecessor loudspeaker for the Alexia V. And I have to tell you, that was supposed to be an in-game speaker for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, when the opportunity came to upgrade, And I said, yeah, I think I want to try that. I want to see what Daryl Wilson, the designer, and the other engineers on his team, Vern and that crew, came up with. I knew it'd probably be a step up. But part of me is like, I just got them dialed into this room. I had this magician named Jim Smith come in and precisely, and I'm talking down to the millimeter, or a few millimeters anyway, locate these things where the room interactions were as favorable as possible. And it just, live music flowed out of the Alexia IIs. I had it set up with the Doshi Audio stereo amplifier, which puts out 65 watts, I think, a side, and they did fine. And I was like, what if I've done this? I sort of got that classic buyer's remorse. I put in the order and I'm like, what if I don't like some of what the Alexia V does? What if Daryl made some design choices that weren't favorable to my ears? What was I going to do then? And what would the paint look like? I'm doing something different. I went with this sort of burgundy cranberry pearl paint. What if the Alexia Vs did not measure up to the enjoyment I was getting out of the Alexia IIs? So I wait a few weeks later, a truck shows up with one of those ramps that comes down and starts unloading the wooden crates that these monster speakers come in. They're about 4 feet high and change. They are, or a little under 4 feet high, I think. But they weigh like 270 or 280 pounds a piece, and that's uncrated, I believe. These are monster speakers, but I just didn't know. The shipper then picked up the Alexia IIs, and those went back to the Wilson factory in Provo. So I'm left with these things, and I got my good friend Jimmy over, who's a fellow audiophile, and thank goodness I somehow convinced him to help me unload these monsters. They do come on wheels, but I got these things set up, and I noticed a few things, and I started to get a good feeling. Despite my wondering. Obviously, I was excited in many ways. This was an early Christmas for me, in the early fall days. But as we uncrated the speakers, I really saw something impressive. You don't know this about me, but I've been a car detailing enthusiast for several years. But it's kind of taught me to look for very minute changes in paint quality. And I detail more high-end cars, more BMWs and Porsches and Mercedes, that sort of thing, some exotic cars, just sort of doing things on the side, cars that my friends have or people I've met through the local Porsche club. And I understand paint quality fairly well, I think it's safe to say. It's one of the weird skills I picked up along the life journey. And I have to tell you, this cranberry pearl paint, it's the upper echelon of the different levels of paint you can do. And it's one reason why these speakers are more expensive than the base Alexia V, which I think is around $67,000. I think these are around $79,000. So it's quite an investment. But we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But this cranberry pearl paint, think of it as sort of like a candy apple red, but it's dark. It's a dark burgundy with a lot of metallic flake in it. I started looking at this cabinet, and while the topaz color in the Alexia IIs was really done well, there was just not a flaw on this. I think Wilson quality control must be getting better. I don't think it was bad on the Alexia IIs, but this paint is just flawless. It's an automotive paint that goes over the phenolic cabinet that Wilson makes, and it's kind of hard to describe without coming over and seeing this. It's just a really wonderful level of paint quality. So that was the first thing I noticed. And then I looked at the hardware, and there have been a lot of changes, a lot of upgrades, a lot of things that I was sort of slightly annoyed at on the Alexia II all got fixed. So now what we have is great paint quality, great overall build quality. To me, the devil's in the details. That was something I was really excited about. The second thing I noticed, and I drove this thing with my new, at the time, fairly new Audio Research Ref 160 amp, which is a killer piece. We'll have to talk about at some point the job that Trent Suggs and his team, Dave Gordon, and everybody's doing there at the factory, Warren Gale. These folks are really sort of reached a new level, I think, since leaving the Macintosh family and kind of getting back to their roots a little bit in terms of an independent company and kind of focusing on design. And we've seen that in the upgrades with the remotes, which are just spectacular. This is a company, I think, on the rise, and it's no secret that I've been a big fan. I actually wrote a pretty big check last year and received both the Ref 160 stereo, their latest line stage, the Ref 6 SE, and the Ref Phono 3 SE for the large record collection I have. I really wanted to do that. But what I noticed was the Doshi amp was having an easier time driving these speakers. I felt like there was a sense of ease in terms of how the speaker and the amp was integrating, and I thought it was an even better match in terms of the Ref 160 stereo. Now, it's not quite a fair comparison because the Ref 160 stereo is rated at 140 watts a side of power, but in fact, the Ref 160 stereo probably puts out more like 180. So I think there's plenty of power, but this is a much easier load to drive, these Alexia V speakers. Obviously, this was a benefit to me. I knew that I think the speaker and amp combination is one of the more important ones you have in a system, and I do believe that we had sort of reached a very strong pairing. A lot of folks will pair these with D'Agostino amps. I've heard that combination. That's outstanding as well. I think anything with high current and a decent amount of power is going to fit these speakers particularly well. Now, the third thing that I noticed was bass. There have been a lot of changes to the woofer cabinet in this speaker. And as I started playing some of these test tracks that I have from Qobuz and Tidal, I started to get that gut punch, that sensation where you're getting those sort of little bit of a pounding in the chest. You can feel the visceral impact on the bass. This is something David Solomon and I have had some conversations about. And I really like that. I really like to feel the bass. I really like when I play a yellow track with deep bass, or maybe the convergence track from Malia. That bass really hits me in the gut, and I really feel like I've sort of been enveloped and I'm part of that sound stage now. That sound field is now alive. And the other thing that I've come to notice, and we'll talk about this a bit when I add subwoofers to the system, is having that bass become better also has an impact on the sound staging and what that does for the music and how realistic and natural that music is. So those were the first three things I heard. So what I'd like to do now is kind of do a two-part review. In part one, we'll talk about the design and build quality, and I'll show you video I've shot of the various parts, because there have been a lot of upgrades. In fact, what I'd like to propose is the overall conclusion, and I hope you stick around and see the whole video, but the Alexia V really is a step change. The reason it's gotten so many glowing reviews is that it really is a huge improvement over the Alexia II. Now, the Alexia II, don't get me wrong, excellent speaker, a dream speaker for most people, happily live with it, it's just wonderful. But the V, to my ears, has so much of the qualities of the Alex V. The V is for V material, by the way, we'll come back to that. And I think it's safe to say a lot of the family values that are in the XVX Chronosonic, which, based on my listening at trade shows, unfortunately I don't have a pair here at the house, but that's probably one of the best speakers out there. You guys have heard me rap very positive things about Magico speakers lately on this channel, but I think for me, for my ears, the XVX is right up there in terms of the limited sort of handful of speakers that are doing reference quality at the very top of the current high-end audio world right now. If you're going to have a speaker like the Alexia V's in-house, I think it's safe to say that if you can get them to sound with a lot of the values that the XVX Chronosonic has, you're doing very well indeed. Maybe someday Danny Kaye will invite me over to hear his XVXs, who knows. But in any way, what I'd like to talk about is the build quality. There've been quite a number of changes, so let's dive into that. The first thing we need to talk about is why the speaker is named the way that it is. It does have V material. So this is a new compound that Wilson came up with that's particularly good at dampening vibrations. So they put it in two key areas of this speaker. They put it at the top of the woofer cabinet, and they also put it at the top of the mid-range enclosure. So the speaker has, the tweeter on top, which has got an adjustable module that moves back and forth and can move up and down. It's got the mid-range driver, which also is sort of independent, nested, if you will, on top of the cabinet. And by the way, there are now cutouts on the cabinet, just like you see in the Sasha DAW, which many people argue may be the sweet spot of the Wilson line. I'm not sure anymore because the V's so good, but that's up for debate. And I think what that winds up doing is it allows less distortion between the various cabinets that interact. So obviously, to get the timing right, we have these movable, what Wilson calls adaptable drivers, where you can move them back and forth and adjust precisely to the dimensions of where the listener is seated in your listening room. By having this vibration, this V material dampened vibrations, effectively what it's doing is letting more music come out in a cleaner fashion, a more precise fashion from the drivers themselves. And they've also worked a little bit on the driver alignment. So they're doing these things down to very precise, probably millimeter or even sub-millimeter levels of precision. And what that does is it tightens up the timing and when those sound waves hit your ear. And it's all adjusted through their nomograph technology to exactly where your ear is, how high up it is, and how far back you are from the right or left tweeter. So what happens there is you're just basically getting more precision in those upper cabinets. You're hearing less distortion and less noise because of the V material. And so how the drivers interact with each other is having an impact on the sound, which I'll describe a little later on. The other thing that was a big change with this speaker, and fortunately Wilson has made available to use on other speakers, even if they're not, at the V material level, and that is they use that technology to build better spikes. So they've got this acoustic diode, which has a patch of V material on top of a newly re-engineered spike. And what that's doing is kind of twofold. It's sort of a different approach to how the spikes interact with the cabinet, because it's not totally moving around like you might have if you put the Isoacoustics Gaia feet. A lot of my friends have had a lot of success with the Gaia feet under their Magico speakers. In this case, it is a foot that is rigid, but it's got the dampening of the V material. So it's more like a traditional spike with V material dampening. So the speaker cabinet isn't floating in a way, it's actually providing some rigidity. So the addition of the acoustic diode's feet, I think, does contribute a bit to the accuracy of the speaker. The tweeter is new, so it's got the Convergent Synergy carbon tweeter, and what they've done is they've 3D printed the sort of the tunnel on the back wave of the tweeter in carbon, and what that's done is get greater high frequency extension and better harmonic detail. They also removed some screws from the tweeter front plate, and that sort of created fewer diffraction elements and a less cluttered look. I think in many ways, though, my favorite part of the speaker is the mid-range driver. So the mid-range driver is using their new QuadraMag technology, and essentially what that does is it creates a better measuring driver, and you get more tonal accuracy from that. And they also created more cabinet volume. So there's 6.4% more volume versus the prior speaker. And the company claims that leads to a more open-sounding mid-range, and as we'll discuss later, I do believe that to be true. The mid-range on this was actually derived from the Alex V, and it is spectacular. The mid-range driver probably has had the biggest impact on sound quality improvements that I've experienced in my listening. However, that gut punch bass that we were talking about, and I mean that in a good way, I don't mean it in an overly tight, overly punchy bass. I mean, just representing what's in the music file I listen to, the grooves on the LP, or when I play back a tape. I'm just hearing that amount of information. And I think that's where we come to the biggest change in the actual speaker cabinet dimensions, which is the woofer cabinet. So the woofers have 9% or nearly 9% more volume. And that leads to deeper low frequency reproduction and faster transient settling. And it is actually quite noticeable over the Alexia II. So there you have it in terms of the drivers that have been upgraded. Between the tweeter, the mid-range, and the driver, in a lot of ways it feels like a smoother, more refined, more open sounding, more lifelike speaker. And I think all three of those combine. We talked about the acoustic diode feet, but they also did a lot of stuff on the back end. They improved the way the stair step works, which adjusts the mid-range driver and how it moves up and down, so you get more precise alignment to the feet. It used the more sort of neural turn knob that they had developed on the Sasha DAW. And in a first that I've ever seen, which I also thought was cool, they added a bubble level on the top of the woofer cabinet. They also cleaned up the cable dressing. The bubble level's kind of cool though, because that makes you understand that both speakers have this actually, and you know that speaker cabinet is perfectly level, and that helps with the alignment of the speaker to the sweet spot of the room as well. And the back of the cabinet is just a whole lot cleaner. They have added the sort of notch in the back. Wilson found that in the Alexia II, what would happen is sound waves would build up on the back of the speaker, and the sound didn't have anywhere to go, and that was actually creating distortions. So by putting in that little triangular notch on the back of the Alexia V cabinet, that sound's now is now able to escape and have, again, cleaner, less noise introduced to the system. And they've also kind of gone to, I think, probably better cable and a more simple cable dressing. There was a lot of discussion at one point about how if you move the speakers connecting the woofer cabinet to the mid-range, you could change the sound a little bit. They've cleaned that up. They've made that a lot more precise. And the thing that I really like, though, and this is maybe my exotic car fandom coming out, is that they've added a carbon fiber backing plate where the resistors are. So there's a little window on the back, which we'll show here in the video, where there's the resistors, and you can change those resistors out every couple of years, which is recommended, and that keeps the speaker fresh. And that just adds to a tremendous amount of beauty. And then there's something that is maybe perhaps, I don't know for sure, it's hard to figure out what's the percentage contribution, but they've come out with these Wilson capacitors. They bought the capacitor company, and if you saw the video with Michael Fremer touring the Wilson factory, you'll see me skulking around in the background on a couple of scenes. But I was there seeing how they've got these new capacitor winding machinery that's really fascinating to watch. And they've basically figured out a better way to make those caps. And it's now all Wilson. They talk about a vertically integrated enterprise. So these caps add a noticeable level of clarity. They are more advanced than what was in the Alexia II, and that's led to increased low-level resolution. And I think that improved crossover parts and design are having a definite impact on the Alexia V. So you put all this stuff together, and what are you left with? Well, you've left with music. A very realistic, open, very clearly defined soundstage, very taut gut punch bass, a very visceral involvement in the music. While I know there are probably a lot of Alexia II owners out there that don't want to upgrade, it's a substantial expense to with trade-in, it might be still a pretty good expense to move to the Alexia Vs. However, I think that if you can swing that gap, that additional money to get the Alexia Vs, it might be a good thing to do. And with Wilson's CPO program, there's going to probably be some lucky guy out there, or gal, I hope, that can get a hold of your Alexia IIs and enjoy that level of sound quality. But if you can do this, if you can get to the Alexia V, I suspect almost all Alexia II owners would not regret that upgrade at all. I think with Wilson, they're a fine enough company. When they do a revision, there's a noticeable improvement in sound. Moving from the Alexia II to the Alexia V was not a noticeable improvement in sound. That's not a good adjective. It was a step change improvement in sound. You went from here to there. And everybody that's come over to my house, and I know a lot of crazy audiophiles, I know a lot of experienced audiophiles, and I have a lot of good friends that just aren't into sound. But when they've heard the Alexia Vs, I ask them, do you hear anything different? I try not to prompt them, and bias their views, and they're like, yeah, this is clearly an improvement. It sounds more clear and open. That's what I hear from people that are not audiophiles that have come over and have heard this speaker. And that makes me happy, because I think there is this sort of myth that you have to have golden ears to really appreciate some of this higher quality stuff. But no, if the music's more lifelike, it's just simply more lifelike and more natural, and a lot of people haven't heard that before. If you can give them an experience as an audiophile of hearing what good sound, is capable of these days in 2023, I think a fair number of them may actually want better sound at their house. They may not go crazy like some of us have and get to this level of equipment, but they might upgrade their headphones. They might upgrade their two-way monitors. But needless to say, these speakers have created some joy in my house, and they've been a little bit of a productivity drain, because at night sometimes I come down here and I listen to the Alexia Vs, and I go, well, I'm just going to go down there for an hour. I really got to get to sleep tonight. And I'll wind up spending 4 hours listening to this and going through my system with the audio research electronics, with the DCS Rossini Apex converter. As I dig through old files and play CDs and SACDs, I am, in a way, rediscovering music, because I am hearing that low-level detail. I am hearing better micro and macro dynamics with the Vs. Obviously, you've got to take into account associated gear. The DCS Rossini Apex, which I have also reviewed, which is coming up soon as well. That's sort of a breakthrough digital product, at least for me. There's better stuff out there, obviously the Vivaldi Apex, but for me, that's a defining source. I've got this wonderful VPI Scoutmaster. It's pretty long in the tooth at these points, as one of my friends would say, but I've upgraded it with a 3D arm, and I've got this wonderful current Ref Phono 3 SE Phono Stage. So I've got really good analog sources. I've got a rebuilt Revox PR99. The amplification, the line stage, and the amplifier from Audio Research have all contributed to the sound that I'm about to describe. So I did want to do a little bit of a shout out to the associated electronics. I've also had the pleasure of trying increasingly more of the Shignato Mega cable, which I think very highly of. The synergistic Galileo SX cable, also wonderful stuff. And a new cable for me is the Anzus cable from Audio Group Denmark. I saw this being made. We have an Ethernet switch review coming soon that we've already filmed. And these three cable brands are, I think, near the top of what you can do in terms of cable. Oddly enough, I haven't yet tried the transparent cable. A lot of people with Wilsons do try that. Maybe I'll have an opportunity to do that in the future, but I just wanted to give you an idea of sort of what we're working with here. We've done a lot of tweaks to the system. We've done a lot of tweaks to the room. We have GIK panels to the first reflection point of the left speaker and the right speaker, and we have the front wall is covered with GIK acoustic panels, and we're using the A series, which are half reflective and half absorptive. So I think Glenn's going to come over. We're going to shoot a video with him, and we'll do more stuff with GIK in the future. But this hopefully gives you an idea of what the Alexia Vs can do. I should also mention that I'm on a slab here. It's a 15 by 20 by 10 and a half foot tall ceiling room, and I have carpet down. So the acoustics of the room measure extremely well on both the RTA 60 measurements and, the RT60 measurements, and the overall RTA of the room is pretty flat. So I think it's actually a pretty good room for reviewing equipment, subbing things in and out. But now that I've laid the context of what my system does, I'll share some impressions on sound quality, and hopefully that brings value to your travels in the audiophile space. Thank you.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show.
Okay, so now I've changed places, and I'm now seated to the right side of my right channel Alexia V. This is the beautiful cranberry pearl finish, tweeter, mid-range, and the two woofers. It's got a longer cabinet. It goes back about another inch, I think. I think it's something like maybe a half-inch taller over the Alexia IIs. And I think it's about a quarter-inch wider. In fact, I believe 1.25 inches deeper, actually, on the cabinet. So I just figured it'd be good to talk about sound quality while I'm seated right next to these drivers that do such a good job. So I've been listening to Qobuz files and title files, and I've got some sound impressions I want to share with y'all. I sort of picked these tracks because I think that they're pretty clear. You can kind of listen for specific things in each test track. This was something that Jim Smith taught me, is to have a set of test tracks, and I actually have his as well. Some tracks are good for hearing different elements and different characteristics of the sound. So I want to tell you what I've been hearing. It's really kind of a joy to do this review because it meant that I had to listen to a lot of music and write down my thoughts. And I kind of waited on that because I wanted to get a really good idea of what these speakers could do. So I could be as descriptive as possible to the readers and viewers out there that follow along this channel. By the way, as I sit here, we're at 9,800 and climbing subscribers on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it. I think in YouTube land, when you get above 10,000, when you hit 10,000 subscribers and start moving past it, it kind of kicks things up a notch. So we're going to test that. We're going to see what the algorithm does. Thanks for tuning in, and let's talk a little bit more about the sound qualities that I'm hearing with this speaker. I think the first thing I want to start out with, and I apologize, I do have a couple of trade show warhorses here. There's a track that Fink does that everybody's heard a million times. It might actually at this point be entering Diana Krall territory in terms of overplayed tracks, but I think it is useful. So his acoustic track, Trouble's What You're In, you can really get a sense of it being a live event. You can hear the audience very clearly on the Alexia Vs. But what's really cool is you can hear the reverb of the hall that he's performing in. And his voice is very clear. The guitar is a little bit, I don't know how to describe it. It's good for transients because the guitar sort of abruptly starts and stops at the very beginning of the recording. And it's just a very cool song. But I think what we're hearing on this track in particular is the mid-range quality that these speakers are capable of. It's a very lifelike sound. It starts to get into the territory of you really feel like you're at that musical event. Kind of start thinking about the performance a lot more than you do, wow, I didn't know speakers could do that. And I think that's kind of what these speakers do. They kind of move you from being, if you are already a gearhead, into more of a music lover. And by that I mean it in sort of a complimentary way. I think it's okay to be a gearhead. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But I think a lot of us in audio get so wrapped up and fascinated by the technology, we don't always sort of focus on the musical performance that we're listening to. And I try and guard myself against that. I want to have fun. If people ask whether I'm a music lover or a gearhead, I go, I like both. I think both's a valid answer. But I think when I listen to the better systems, when I listen to something where a designer's been thorough and done an A+ job, like Daryl has here, I feel like I'm more connecting with the music, and I'm thinking less about the equipment. I'm thinking less about, oh, I'm glad I got the clock for the Rossini, or I'm glad I was able to buy the line stage from Audio Research, or I wonder if I could change these cables out, or maybe try some different footers and get a little bit more detail all around. I'm not really caring anymore. I'm thinking, wow, this guy Fink is a really interesting performer. I can hear the crowd crystal clear, and I just start to get lost in the music. A good example of that is the Say a Little Prayer song that Dionne Warwick was famous for. Hearing the MQA track, Leon LaHavas, sing that, you can hear the dynamic range of her voice. It goes from soft to loud in a number of places in the song. And Leanne has a beautiful voice. You can hear the individual members doing the shout outs and whistles in the crowd while she sings this. And again, you get a sense of the hall, the live event that it's in. It's kind of magical. It's a very awesome guitar and vocal only rendition of this wonderful song, Say a Little Prayer. And the Alexia V's are just firing on all cylinders. And I think one of the things that makes it a little more realistic too in this sound is, now that I've got these speakers completely dialed in terms of setup, they literally disappear. You cannot hear the sound coming from the left drivers or the right drivers. They've just completely disappeared, and an entire deep, wide soundstage has unfolded. And this has happened time and time again to the various tracks that I've listened to. Whether it's Leanne LaHavas or Fink, you can also hear the clarity of the guitar chords. It's not that sort of congealed mess you sometimes get with lower resolution speakers. It's a very defined, very perfect timbre on that instrument. And we heard this again also when we listened to Nick and I's recording of the Texas Guitar Quartet, which we did in 24-176. And when we play that back, you have 4 guitarists sitting at Northside Baptist Church here in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a great small chapel but wonderful acoustic space. And I think we had the magic mic placement. The mic placement gods were smiling down on Nick and I that day, and it was really Nick that figured that out, so I give him full credit. But you can hear those individual guitars as distinct instruments, and you can hear the playback when I play any of the songs that they've done, which was classical guitar music. And it's just a wonderful way to experience a live to 2-track recording of live accomplished guitarist seated left to right, 4 in a row, playing guitar. It's a very natural recording. I think, honestly, it's one of the best that Nick and I have been involved in. The recording gods were just really smiling on us that day. But the speakers recreated that guitar work perfectly. And it's a guitar performance that would impress anybody, whether they come from the classical or the rock world. Beautiful string instruments, played well in a realistic acoustic space. And here too, on this recording, we captured the soundstage quite well. You can hear the individual guitars left to right, but there's a depth to the soundstage as well. And the acoustics of that chapel at Northside Baptist Church here in Atlanta are such that it's very easy to enjoy the beauty of that sort of natural acoustic space. So again, on this track, it's sort of raised. I had heard that a little bit on the Alexia IIs, I'll be honest, but this sort of just took it to another level. It just felt, and I think maybe the mid-range driver is part of the reason there, that improved mid-range driver, which they learned when they were building the Alex V speaker. It allowed that guitar performance to come to life. On Qobuz, there's a track, famous Elvis track, Fever, and there's some really fast, transient kind of drum fill action going on in the background. You can hear that very clearly on the speaker. The other thing is that there's sort of a almost an atmospheric emptiness of sorts on that track, and that sort of space and dimensionality worked very well for that recording. And so it's a very interesting recording to sort of think about soundstage as well. One of my favorite performers, I think I get this from my dad a little bit, he was a huge fan, but Ricky Lee Jones has always done some great recordings, and I think one of the tracks that's been making its way around the trade shows, but I knew this track before. I've been following her career pretty close. I think she's a brilliant performer. But this track, Showbiz Kids, where she does a cover of the great Steely Dan track, is just, it's magnificent. From the clarity in the triangle and percussion that's at the beginning of the song to the guitar, everything's just so natural. I think her voice has a little bit of chestiness in it, and I think I think that's captured well. That might be the tweeter and the mid-range working together a little bit on that, certainly the mid-range. But I just feel like, and maybe it's this sort of carbon fiber tube on the tweeter, but there's an airiness to the highs that's very natural and in such a way it really doesn't draw attention to itself. And so I think this Ricky Lee Jones track is another example. There's also, in my MQA test track list that Ken Forsyth made me aware of, there's a song called Gotta Be Patient, and it's got Sophia Reyes, Michael Bublé, I forget who else is on it, but it's just a wonderful upbeat track, and Bublé's voice is just so perfectly recreated. It's a fun track. It's just a wonderful song, and something like that's fun to listen to every once in a while you're doing critical listening. And I try to not take myself too seriously. I want to convey to the viewer what things sound like. But if you listen to that track, you can hear the additional detail. Now, Led Zeppelin's one of my favorite classic rock bands, and I think certainly a pinnacle of their career was Led Zeppelin II. And we all miss John Bonham. I mean, he was before my time. I sort of discovered Zeppelin in the 80s, and they were really a 70s band, but, better late than never, right? So John Bonham just had this dynamic drum playing. And I think one of the things the Alexia V's are doing that I've heard on this track of his, which is always a favorite for mine, is the track Moby Dick. And it's got an extended John Bonham, very, sort of raucous, moving track with a lot of visceral energy coming off of John Bonham's kit. And whether I'm listening to that on like the Classic Records LP, which is good, or the Super Deluxe box set, or the Qobuz, I think it's 2496 file, you hear all of those dynamics. All of those dynamics are recreated with the Alexia V. And, I've got my classic rock moments, I've got my Blue Note jazz moments, and then I've got these tracks here, which I may get criticized for being a little bit audiophile in nature, but not really. And that brings us to a not really audiophile track that's starting to get played a lot at trade shows, and that is Man in the Long Black Coat by Bob Dylan. This is a fantastically well recorded track. It's a great performance. Bob Dylan is older. He's got that raspy voice that we all know, and there's a chestiness to his voice. And what I hear that recreated very naturally on the Alexia V's. Similar track is the chestiness of Dean Martin's voice. And I think, and that comes on his Dream with Dean album, which Analog Productions put out, which is a beautiful, well-mastered, well-presented LP, as we know Chad's prone to do. On that, if you play that LP on my humble VPI Scoutmaster, and you hear that through the tube phono stage, there's a chestiness there that's captured. And that chestiness is something that's often a little thinned out on lesser speakers. It's something that usually goes a little bit missing. And here it's presented in all its glory, and it makes it sound like Dean Martin standing in the listening room drinking a gin and tonic, and he's singing into the microphone. It's a very lifelike realism. That's, I believe, a 45 RPM record set, so you're getting that extra 45 detail. And everything is really kind of recreated. Going back to the Dylan track, Man in the Long Black Coat, there's some opening guitar work, and it's both in the left speaker and the right speaker. And that guitar work, the transients, the timbre of the instruments, everything's recreated perfectly. So it really sets the stage. And then for sort of a fun track to sort of end this discussion on my sound impressions of the Alexia Vs, we'll go to Yellow's great album, Toy. There's a very strange track on it called Magma. And Magma is basically like vocal eruptions, almost like you're looking at bubbles bubble up inside a volcano. And maybe that's why it's called Magma, where they're just these sort of electronic vocal effects like Yellow's so expertly at doing. And they just sort of erupt. And you just go, and it's just strange vocals. It's nothing really defined. And then there's sort of like an atmospheric tone, which Yellow is also expert at doing, sort of underlying and serving as the foundation to the whole thing. Well, what's interesting about this track is a couple of things. One is they're abrupt noises. These vocal eruptions can be very abrupt and very fast and very dynamic, and they sort of pop up all over the soundstage. So you're listening to these vocal things, and you're like, man, the Dieter and Boris, these guys were weird in the Yellow band. But they've got these really cool vocal effects going on, and they're just popping up all over a very deep and wide soundstage. And the Alexias do a magnificent job. In fact, there are a couple of times where it's not any regular timing that these vocal things erupt, and there's just sort of this low bass wave of energy sort of underlying everything. And they tend to pop up, and they're completely out of the speakers. The speakers have completely disappeared. I think even more so the Alexia II. Is that because there's more precision in how the drivers are aligned? Does it have to do with more accuracy in the bass and mid-range drivers? I don't know, but it all works. And so that's sort of a strange track to end on, but I think it does demonstrate the sound quality of these speakers. So in concluding, I would say that I give the Alexia V my highest recommendation. Even discounting some owner bias, obviously, I would say that, make sure you have enough of an amplifier to drive them. But one of the things I forgot to mention earlier on build quality is in redesigning the crossover and bringing out more clarity from that, Daryl also wound up with a speaker that's 1 dB more efficient. I think they're 89 dB efficient, unless I'm mistaken. And they're just, so that makes them a lot easier to drive than the Alexia IIs. But they're a very manageable speaker. I think some reasonable power amps will go along with them. The speaker in the cranberry pearl finish, which I'm fairly proud of, is I think $79.5. I think the base price is $67.5. So this is a very big investment for most people out there. I think some of my friends might think I'm even crazy to have these speakers. But for an audiophile who really wants the last word in a refined speaker, something that sort of evolved. There was an Alexia I, there's an Alexia II, and now we're at Alexia V. The formula just keeps getting better. I think Daryl Wilson is growing as a designer. I think he's sort of taken all of his family learning, if you will, from his father Dave, and he's combined that with new materials, new parts, new learning, and new approaches, and he's wound up with something that his dad would think he'd be really proud of his design. And I think that these speakers are probably, in its price category, one of the best speakers out there. I've heard a lot of stuff lately in sort of my work with TAS and traveling around the country, and I will say these speakers are really competitive, I think, with other speakers in that sort of $67,000 to $80,000 price range. You don't have to go crazy and get the pearl. The 67.5 is works with a number of standard colors, and I think the next level up is a few $1,000s more. But for someone like me that was kind of into car detailing, having that the upper end finish is something that I may appreciate a little more than other folks. And when you see the color sample kit that comes with these, and the various colors that you can choose, it's pretty amazing. So I think everything's working together. 31 design changes is quite a bit. I think Daryl really kind of took things to a new level. I think it is a significant upgrade, even more so than Wilson normally provides. And I think you're getting quite a lot of that Alex V and XVX Chronosonic technology at a still expensive but more reasonable price. And I don't know what else to say. These have become a time machine. I come down here in this room, and like I mentioned earlier, I plan on being in here for an hour, and time evaporates. And I look at my watch, and it's 4 hours later, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't be staying up this late. I need to get to bed. I've got work tomorrow. Or I come in here in the afternoon, and then all of a sudden it's dinner time. It's a speaker for audiophiles that, provided everything else is right and the setup is dialed in, and setup is very important on any speaker, maybe even a little more so on these because of the time alignment of the drivers. But when you come down here and you listen to music, you forget about the gear. This speaker is one that has turned me into a lover of musical performances and has me thinking a lot less, and sometimes not at all, about what gear needs to be changed or what I should try next. I'm constantly experimenting. I'm an audiophile. But when you get a speaker this level, you just want to enjoy it. You just want to understand. You just want to sit back and listen to the music. So for me, that's my highest recommendation. They are expensive, but they're a wonderful speaker, and I think they're well worth every penny that it costs to own these. And I think if you have an opportunity to upgrade from the Alexia II, as excellent and outstanding as the Alexia II is, this is a huge improvement over the Alexia II. I can tell you based on my own personal experience, I can tell you based on recordings I've done and the live events that I've gone to, these speakers reproduce that sound perfectly well. Are they as good as an Alex V or an XVX Chronosonic? No, I think those are better still. But in this price range and for this size room that I have, 15 by 20 by 10, I think they're the perfect speaker for me. And they look amazing as well. You're going to be buying something, I think, given the established brand that Wilson is, if you want to think about it in pure financial terms, which is always a dangerous thing to do, you are getting a high return on your investment were you to ever have to resell these speakers, or you trade them in and you get the next thing up. You go to the Alex V, or maybe you do a big jump and go to the XVX Chronosonic. But I think that most people, when they hear these speakers, they'll be impressed with what they can do. And if you're lucky enough to own a pair, I think you'll be very happy. So highest level recommendation. Thank you so much for tuning in to our humble Absolute Sound channel. Thank you for all the support. And leave in the comments below if you have any questions or comments, or if you think I'm crazy because these speakers cost too much. Just be polite about it, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks so much.